Welcome back to 535 News. This is Paul Kane of Notice, soon to be the Star. I am joined by a very special guest, Daniel Schuman, the Executive Director of the American Governance Institute. Daniel is an expert on this branch. We're here in the Cannon House office building across the street from the Capitol. He knows the functions of how this place is supposed to work. So much so that he was here till midnight last night at what is always a high-profile markup for viewers of 535, the Legislative Branch Appropriation. So tell us about it. Explain to us, first of all, what is that branch? And explain, how little money there is, but actually how important it is.
So Legislative Branch Appropriations Subcommittee, as you know, there are 12 appropriation subcommittees,
Sure.
which are headed by the Cardinals,
Yes.
which apparently is what passes for humor among appropriators.
It's for old Catholics like I grew up in the family, not for the baseball team, but the College of Cardinals.
That's right.
That elect a pope. The appropriators dubbed themselves the Cardinals many decades ago.
And this is the process by which they determine how much money is going to be spent and on what inside the legislative branch. So some of this decision is made before you get to this point. So there's, roughly $2 trillion worth of federal spending that is appropriated. And they take that $2 trillion and they divvy it up among the 12 appropriation subcommittees. Now there's a formal process that they're supposed to follow. They didn't do any of this. So that hasn't happened.
Okay.
But Ledge Branch was, as always, was given the smallest portion of $7 billion, roughly, which is not enough money to run the legislative branch.
Yeah.
And now, please.
Explain now, because part of that is salaries. A lot of people instinctively think, oh, that's what just pays the salaries of lawmakers and their staff. But it's a fairly sprawling group of things, ranging from Capitol Police to the Library of Congress across the street. How many different agencies are sort of within that? How many? Just give a few highlights of it.
Well, it depends on how you count, but the bigger ones, the Library of Congress is quite large. They're about a $900 million a year budget. You have the Capitol Police, which is about $900 million a year. They have about 2,300 sworn officers and another 400 employees. The architect of the Capitol is quite large. They were asking for $1.6 billion this year. They got about 900 million or so. And then you have a bunch of smaller entities, the Congressional Budget Office, the Office of Congressional Workplace Rights. But to put this in context, so Capitol Police, $900 million. The funding for all the personal offices put together in the House of Representatives, which is called the Member Representational Account, that's about $900 million as well. And funding for the House committees is roughly $230 million. So when you look at the legislative branch budget, most of the money is not going towards lawmaking, it's going towards security and infrastructure, buildings and cops, and support staff to make this place work for the visitors, for the members trying to conduct their operations. And just a final point on that, the money for the policy work hasn't really increased in 25 years. Where all of the new money has gone, or almost all of the new money has gone, is to cops and buildings. Capitol Police in the year 2000, adjusted for inflation, were funded about $150 million a year. They asked for $1 billion this year, they got 900. The architect of the Capitol, I don't know what it was in 2000, because they were building the end of the visitor center.
Yes, that was going on then.
But they asked for $1.6 billion, up from $800 million last year. And they said in the Senate that they're going to need, I think, $15 billion over the next 20 years, because all of these buildings, which they haven't been maintaining, are in dire straits and need to be fixed.
Yeah, there was a report, my colleagues at Notice had this jaw-dropping report in late March. The Rayburn building, 2 buildings over from here, was in, I can't remember, like, catastrophic distress.
Yes.
Like, the building is basically falling to pieces.
Right.
This building, Cannon, has undergone years and years of rehabilitation. I was just in a coffee shop. My colleagues call it the hipster coffee shop.
It's phenomenal.
And all right, overall, what is the trend line compared to a couple years ago? Just we're going to go short term here.
Yeah.
Is this up from a couple years ago in terms of how much they're giving to the lawmaking side of things, and how much should they be increasing things in your mind if they wanted this place to work effectively?
For policy staff have been cut and cut and cut. For the last 3 years, funding for this work has been paused, essentially, so that they would keep the funding level either at baseline adjusted for inflation or below. And the consequence is this is driving a brain drain, that people are leaving the Hill in droves. There was a 24% turnover rate in the personal offices in the House last year. People are not expert in the way that they used to be here. They don't stay for that long, and they're at the very beginning of their careers.
How does that do? I used to have these numbers at the top of my head. 24% turnover, is that any better than it was 5 years or 10 years ago, or is it actually higher?
It depends on which year you pick. So, but the data suggests that this is among the highest turnover rates that we've seen in the time that we've been able to track this information.
Huh. Because some of the salaries have gone up. There was a loosening a few years ago. There was a deal between Democrats and Republicans. Steny Hoyer was the majority leader. He was always pushing for more. So those MRAs that you talk about, the member representational, sort of what you get as a congressman to pay your staff, they loosened that up after it had been cut severely.
But that's a funny story. So in 2010, 2011, the Legislative Branch Appropriations Subcommittee, chaired by Congressman Graves, cut funding for the legislative branch by 10%. So a literal decimation, right? 1 in 10. And it eviscerated the capability of the legislative branch to do its job. And for the ensuing years, they kept the funding down. So I wrote a number of reports starting around the time saying we need to significantly increase funding. In 2019, I'd recommended 20% increase to get us back to parity for the member representational account. And that is what Leader Hoyer and actually Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, in an unusual alliance, pushed for and were able to do. So what we got in 2020 was not better, it was just getting us back to what the 2010 levels were, which themselves were way below what the historical norms have been. So we've never been able to get ahead of this problem. The problem continues to get worse and worse. Sometimes we're able to stave it off for a little while. The Democrats seem to be more willing to invest in staff in certain ways, although there have been some Republicans that have been willing to do this. But we're, again, in this, we need to demonstrate economy to the American people. The way we do that is by doing it at home. Thus, we're going to cut the legislative branch. This goes back to the Gingrich years where we had that same problem. But when you look at funding for the legislative branch, it has grown at half the rate for other non-defense discretionary spending. So that's a mouthful, but what that means is that when you look at all the other non-defense agencies, when they grow by 2%, Leg Branch grows by 1%. So if you compound that over time, the gap between the money that we give to Congress and all the people that they oversee, it goes up like this, like a hockey stick.
So there's a real irony. You talked about Congressman Graves from Georgia, who was that guy who gave the first big cut. It was the Tea Party Congress, and the real cut was going to be we're going to take it out on ourselves. Flash forward 8 years later, Graves had become a kind of institutionalist, and he was the co-chair of a special committee, the Modernization Committee, in short, that was run by Derek Kilmer of Washington as the Democrat and Graves of Georgia. And one of the things that they were trying to do and made recommendations for out of that evenly divided committee were some of these things of give more money for the MRAs, for staff budgets, plus let people get paid more money. The sad kicker to all of this is Tom Graves, once he became that institutionalist, a few months later announced he was retiring from Congress, and I believe he is now downtown, in a lobbying firm of some sort. And that's the point, when you talk about that turnover, a lot of people instinctively say, oh, who cares? They're just terrible staff. What happens is they leave here, and where do they go work?
K Street.
They go to K Street, and then who replaces them? You're the military legislative assistant, and you've gone downtown to work for Boeing. the 23-year-old who doesn't know anything about military affairs gets promoted. Who does that 23-year-old then go to for advice about how to do his job?
Of course, the lobbyists that are coming into their office, as always.
Probably the lobbyist who just left, who's who wasn't even making enough money to be under the cooling off period that you're supposed to do, and so all of a sudden this office is now essentially having military policy being run by its former staffer who works for Boeing or someone else.
When I was a staffer a million years ago, I remember a lobbyist coming to the office, and his shoes cost more than what I earned that month, and that was just what it was.
Okay, I have been on this kick. You have been on this kick. Members themselves have been so politically afraid to talk about raising their own pay. 2009 was the last time that they allowed the cost of living adjustment. There are a bunch of former members who have filed a lawsuit. There was a ruling last night. A ruling is too strong, but a judge in this case is basically saying that these former members are right, essentially, right? Can you
That's
explain
right.
it?
So a federal claims court judge, it's a case brought by Rodney Davis, who was the former chair of the House Administration Committee, they claim that they were basically entitled to back pay. So it's a little weedy, but in the late 80s there was legislation that said that members couldn't earn outside pay. They couldn't receive honoraria and a number of other things, and in return for that, in a one-time pay bump, that their salary would be adjusted to basically keep pace with inflation. It could never be more than a 5% increase, and it would be basically the equivalent, a little bit less than what other federal employees got. And that was the plan to depoliticize, and they did it for members of Congress, they did it for federal judges, and they did it for others as well. But what happened is, of course, politics intruded. Only a couple years into that process, there was an effort to use the appropriations process to basically pause this increase. And I think there have been 23 or 24 pauses over, since 1993 or 1994. And the result is, if you look at 2009 pay, so members of Congress currently earn $174,000 a year. If they hadn't had their pay frozen, they would be currently earning $270,000 a year. So it's the $100,000 difference. And what Rodney Davis has sued for with other members is basically their back pay, their retirement benefits, and there's a third thing that I don't remember, some other calculation about their pension.
Yeah, and the judge seems to have said that what they are stating is true, that they did this denial of the pay violated the 27th Amendment. This is the second straight week I've referenced the 27th Amendment. I love it. And that now I think they're into a period where they're figuring out the cost. Real quick, how long do we know before the judge is going to say, all right, there's this much pay coming?
We don't know. They're going to have to figure it out. There are still other legal questions that need to be addressed as well as factual questions. So what we had yesterday was summary judgment. Okay. Right? So the court said four things, at least I shouldn't say four things because if I don't remember, I'll fall, but the four things should be that the 27th Amendment applies to variations in pay. So if you increase it or if you decrease it, that the 27th Amendment applies.
All right, we're going to have to pause there. Okay. We'll come back.
Yes,
when we get a final ruling on this, we're going to have you back. All right, everybody, we're going to take a break, and we will be right back.